today we have Professor Farhat Nasreen with us. She is an excellent scholar, researcher, and she is also a professor and head of department at the Department of History at Jamia Millia Islamia. She taught military history to cadets at the Indian Military Academy, Dehradun, before joining Jamia Millia Islamia. And she also is an author of 5 books and 18 articles. And today she will be sharing with us her research on exchange of knowledge as dialogue, the case of medicine, meditation, and more. So, ma'am, you have 45 minutes to and up to an hour to continue with your session. And after that, the students will raise their hand and ask their questions one by one. So over to you, ma'am. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so very much, Alia. So, hi, everybody. I thought we'll just have a look at, what is dialogue when we think of things which are not just about, poetry and maybe culture and maybe, things which are kind of light and somewhat fancy, because medicine is something which is far more serious. And it is almost a requirement, sometimes a matter of life and death. So how do we have a dialogue in medicine if we were to, kind of explore that? Now, for exploring that, incidentally, in Hindustan is a very, very fertile ground to explore that, because here we had 2 systems of medicine which were extremely popular. One, of course, is the Ayurveda that which is the indigenous Hindustani system of medicine. And then with Ayurveda, there was another thing, which was the yoga. So the yoga has more to do with the physical exercises and also some metaphysical concepts which are attached with yoga. And the other was the Ayurveda. So the Ayurveda itself has 2 major, people who are writing about the Ayurveda system. So we have Charak. So we have the Charak Samhita, which is an ancient Indian book on medicine. And the other one is Sushruta's work. Now, Sushruta talks about surgery. And if you're talking about medicine, because, the science of medicine itself has 2 branches. One has to do with medicine per se, and the other has to do with surgery. So Sushruta for surgery, and we have Charak Samhita for medicine. Now, when you see what Charak writes in the Charak Samhita, some of the things that he talks about are typically a part of the I would say is the international Hippocratic oath, which has to do with the idea like this, that the physician has to be someone who's spiritual in character, not someone who's very greedy, not someone who's very worldly. So there has to be a combination of knowledge, which is purely medical knowledge, also spirituality when you're talking about a practitioner and a healer. Then he also will speak about things like this, that your instruments, if you're using any, they have to be absolutely clean. The environment of the patient has to be absolutely clean. The medicines that you give him have to be understood in the sense whether his body accepts them or no. So you cannot give a medicine to a patient who is allergic to something. So you have to take into account all the allergies of your patient. And then, of course, it'll go on to talk about the various herbs which are to be used for various kind of treatments. Now, this is one set. The other set, which brings in dialogue really, is the tib. Because the tib, or what is known as the Unani medicine, is another chain of medication, another way of looking at healing, which came into Hindustan with the Arabs first. So when the Arabs came to Hindustan as traders, some of them brought with them healers of their own, some of them who stayed back. So you have the Unani system of medicine, which coexists with the Hindustani Ayurvedic system. Now, as the name Unani itself suggests, the root of what is known as the tibia. I mean, tibia is something which is, usually it's a word which is used for the Unani system. But the word Unani itself indicates that this is the Greek system of medication. The moment we say something that is attached with the Greek civilization, we know that the Greek civilization has got very, very old roots. And the other interesting thing is that the Greek civilization, with the collapse of the Roman Empire in the between, the 3rd and the 4th, 5th centuries, you find that if you are familiar with history, you would know that when the Roman Empire was declining, there were two things which were happening. One was all of the Western civilization and the empire in the Western part, with Italy and Rome as the epicenter, all that was going down politically and economically and also socially, in fact. And you have what are known as the Germanic tribes, who overran the whole of Western Europe. And so the Western European culture and the Western European learning, all of that moved towards Eastern Europe. As you know, the civilized part of the people who could survive these attacks, and of course it would have been the rich. So they started shifting towards Eastern Europe. So you find that a lot of the Greek learning, together with the Roman additions to it, all of that got shifted to Eastern Europe, to the area which is known as the Byzantine. So in the Byzantine Empire, you have what is known as the Hellenic and the Hellenistic civilization. So Hellenic is basically the Greek civilization, and Hellenistic is everything which is influenced by the Greek civilization. So once you have the movement of this civilization to Eastern Europe, it's going to get mixed up with a number of things which were already there in Eastern Europe. So you have a mixture of the Unani, which is coming from Yunnan, also things which were there in Eastern Europe. And then finally with the Arabs, you will have, because the Arabs were in conflict with Byzantium. They were trying to get control of this area politically and militarily. So eventually when they're successful, and you have the Arab traders who anyways, leaving aside politics and military affairs, the trading Arabs were already visiting Hindustan since a long time. So you had the practitioners of Tib who started coming to Hindustan, and they settled here. Now, we find there is an account which comes from an Arab merchant whose name is Shahabuddin al-Umri. So Shahabuddin al-Umri, writing in the medieval Indian period, talks about, there's a very famous volumes of books which he has produced, and in those expansive volumes there are pages about Hindustan as well, and those few chapters, they have to do with the reign of Muhammad bin Tughlaq, the famous Sultan of Delhi Sultanate. And Shahabuddin al-Umri's book is known as the Masalikul Absar fi Mamalikul Amsar. So in the Masalikul Absar fi Mamalikul Amsar, he's going to talk about the medicine system as well. Besides other things, he's going to talk about a lot of things, but medical system is also a part of it. Let me tell you first what he says is that there was a textbook written by Ibn Sina, Avicenna, the famous medical practitioner, who's considered to be the father of medicine. So there was a text written by Avicenna which someone presented to Muhammad bin Tughlaq. Now, this is noted by Shahabuddin al-Umri, and he says that Muhammad bin Tughlaq was very pleased on receiving the book, and he really rewarded the presenter and so on and so forth. And then he goes on to write that in Hindustan, the diseases are peculiar to the place, because of course the climatic conditions are different in different places. So he said that you have peculiar diseases here, and sometimes the doctor who accompany us, because these are Arab traders, they may not know the cure for a disease that you may actually, kind of encounter in Hindustan. And it is then only the local Veds who will be able to help us in finding a cure. That is one thing. The other thing, the other very interesting thing that he says is this, that there are too many snakes in Hindustan. So he writes, and this is a 14th century text. So he says that there are too many snakes in Hindustan, and the local Veds, they are familiar with the poison of the snakes which are locally found, and they somehow manage to save the person's life if it is a case of a snake bite. And then he says that when in case if there is an emergency, then they charge the foreigners more than what they charge the Indian population. So it's a very interesting angle, you know, that there is a different rate of the doctors for the foreigners, and there is a different rate of the doctors for the local Hindustani population. So he makes a account, he writes about that as well. And he says that, you know, we have to often consult the local fellows, therefore, to understand how do we treat a particular disease. Now, the interesting part is that a lot of these, you know, Unani practitioners came to Hindustan with the traders. Then a lot more of them came when you have the establishment of what is known as the Delhi Sultanate. So you have Muizuddin Muhammad Sam. Thereafter, you have Qutubuddin Aibak, you know, and Iltutmish. Especially in the period of Iltutmish, a whole lot of these fellows, they came in droves, because the Mongols were very active in the region of Central Asia. The various sultanates there were going down, and the sultanate in Delhi was in fact coming up. So it was, you know, a place where one could expect more of stability, less of political chaos, less of, you know, wars and looting. So a lot of people were migrating here, and together with a number of doctors also came here. So with the doctors, you have a parallel line of medication which is coming here. Now, one thing that we must understand is this, that when you think of, you know, these hospitals, the idea of a private practitioner, the idea of a hospital, the idea of a ward, the idea of an isolation ward, you will find that a number of these things were in fact already present in the regions of Central Asia. They were already there. And why they would be there is because you would find, you know, that with the rise of Islam, and the emphasis of the Prophet on learning, because in Islam there was one thing that the Prophet of Islam kept insisting on, and that was education and learning. And if you're familiar with the kind of things that the Quran swears by, because the Quran is supposed to be the word of God, and then when you think that what are the kind of things that God swears by, किस चीज की कसम खाते हैं, किस चीज की कसम जो है वो अल्लाह खाते हैं. अल्लाह means the worshipable, al-ilah, so it means someone who is worshipable. So कौन सी चीजों की कसम खाते हैं? कलम की कसम खाते हैं. पेन is one of the things जिसकी कसम कुरान में खाई गई है. गुजरते हुए वक्त की कसम खाते हैं. There is a ayat which starts with exactly this, की कसम है गुजरते हुए वक्त की. So all these are indicators, you know. I mean, when the qasam for the qalam starts, it says that qasam hai qalam ki aur wo likhte hain. So there was there was a backdrop of emphasis on education against all odds, whatever the odds may be. That was something that one was supposed to acquire. So you find that there was a sudden impetus in the learning of sciences, in the learning of chemistry, in the learning of diseases. You know that there had been a number of wars that happened, and you find that war means injured. Injured means, you know, you have to take care of your people and so on and so forth. So therefore, there was an emphasis on learning of the sciences, healing, and all of that. So the concept of a hospital and the concept of an isolation ward, say for example, that the identification of measles as a type of disease, and that measles is infectious, so the patient has to be kept separately. All these things were ideas which were already there very early on in the 9th, 10th century in the area of, say for example, Baghdad, which was a hub of Muslim civilization. And and the hospitals there were called Bimaristan. तो बीमारिस्तान जो है वो शब्द इस्तेमाल होता था for the hospitals. And then when we come to Hindustan, and when you're talking especially about the period of Muhammad bin Tughlaq, the innovator that he was, you find that during his period, the hospitals were no longer called the Bimaristan, but they were known as the Shifa Khana, because the word becomes different. Shifa Khana means it's the house of healing, and Bimaristan means the land of the sick. So there is a different take on the hospitals. Now, having said that, and having said that there was an emphasis on on learning, and chemistry was one of the favorite subjects, because जब आप इस पूरे इस दौर के जब अरेबिया की बात करते हैं, then you, in the fanciful world of imagination, you also have the alchemists. And the alchemist is somebody who कीमिया साज जिसको कहते थे. तो जो alchemist या कीमिया साज है, उसका concept ये है that he would be able to convert anything into gold. He would know the formula for that, and that was a formula that people were looking for. So it is a very fanciful idea which people have later on used in fictional setups and otherwise also. It's a popular word. So there is activity that's happening there. And then these guys are migrating here. If you look at the Hindustani scenario, and when you think of the anatomy, say for an example, then the usual practice was this, that although the medical practitioners would be coming from the higher quote-unquote castes, because the learning about herbs, trees, their qualities, and so on, it required reading. It would require reading and acquiring of knowledge, referencing, all of that. So usually the higher quote-unquote caste would be doing that. But then there is a surgical part. So and knowing the human body, which is the anatomy. So generally speaking, it would be somebody of the lower quote-unquote caste who will be dissecting the body, because you have to actually study the body. So they would be dissecting the body, while the actual healer would be watching and understanding how the body is. And this fascination for knowing the insides of a living thing was always there. I mean, even when you look at, say, for example, the Babarnama, or even if you look at Tazuk-e-Jahangiri, which is the autobiography of Jahangir, there is this fascination because he writes that the lion is supposed to be very brave. So once he had shot a lion, and thereafter he got the body dissected, and he had the intestines measured, because आपने मुहावरा सुना होगा कि पेट में 52 हाथ की अतड़ी. This is a muhavra, which it's a saying, which means that कोई आदमी बहुत चालाक है अगर, तो उसके पेट के अंदर the intestines are there, 52 hands, which is really long. So he said that I thought that let me just see कि कितनी लंबी इसकी अतड़ी होती है. Then in the Babarnama, you would say that there was a huge snake which was killed. So Babar says कि उन्होंने उनको कटवाया, उस सांप को कटवाया, पेट बीच से उसका फाड़ दिया, देखने के लिए कि अंदर से ये कैसे इतना मोटा कैसे. तो he says कि उस सांप के अंदर से एक और पूरा सांप निकला, जिसको उसने पूरा के पूरा निगल रखा था, और फिर वो उस दूसरे सांप को भी उन्होंने कटवाया, तो उसके अंदर से यू फाइंड कि एक फ्रॉग निकला. This is in the Babarnama. So there is always this curiosity. Now when you think of, so I was talking about the early ancient period, where you would find that often it is not the highest caste who would be doing the work of dissection and studying the anatomy by touching the body, but they would know about the body. So that was something which was really important. Now, what happens over a period of time, that you have, centers of learning that develop. Like China is one of the ancient civilizations. Egypt is an ancient civilization. Hindustan is an ancient civilization. You had regions of Iraq and Iran, which is Mesopotamia, which was an ancient civilization. So all these systems, all these places had their own systems of medicine which were in place. And the references to some of these systems of medicine might be available maybe from the 4th century BC itself, you get to know. And you would find that there were, when you think of philosophers, thinkers of the ancient period, then they were not people who would only know one subject and be an expert only of that subject. They had to know a lot, I mean, about various things and then put everything together. Like, say, for example, if in today's day and time, if you're thinking that you were, say, for example, talking about being a doctor. So if you're thinking of being a doctor, then you have to also have some idea about the mental state of you have to understand the mental state also of your patient. Perhaps you should also have an idea about the economic state of your patient, because what are the things that he or she can afford. You also need to have an idea about the social status of your patient, because often, more often than not, we find that the recovery rate of women is lesser than the recovery rate of men, because women are not cared for. They are caretakers, but they are not cared for. So if you are a medical practitioner and then you know that, you have a female patient, you have a female patient of a poor strata, you have a female patient of a certain caste or a certain, ethnicity. So you should know that what her limitations would be in the healing process. You have to then know that. So you will have the philosophers of the earlier times would never take up one subject separately. It was always related. So people like Aristotle, or maybe, Plato, Galen, they're all talking about not just about, political science and the idea of maybe researching the idea of society, economy, and so on, but they're also talking about the medical system in their discourse. So it had to be holistic. Now, like I said to you that, there was a quick intermixture of these two systems which happened when you have the establishment of the Delhi Sultanate. The Delhi Sultanate, if you know about the political history, you find that Iltutmish was one of the first of the main consolidators of the Sultanate, but he was such a consolidator that he would not take, too many steps hither and thither simultaneously. So he would, take a decision, wait to see how it pans out. When it works out well, things are consolidated, then he would take the next step. But despite such a staggered, kind of movement towards war and acquisition of more land, there were a number of wars which were happening. And in all these wars, the armies would always have healers, they would have doctors, and since they are moving from place to place, so even if you have a Unani healer with you, because there are people who are migrating here from Iran and Iraq and other regions and Afghanistan and so on and so forth. So even though you may have Unani healers, you cannot operate without the local knowledge of how a person has to be handled. So you find that the Unani Hakims started practicing in Hindustan, but they had to take into consideration the climate of the region and also the availability of herbs that they were looking for, because they would have no clue where a certain herb will be found. So they had to take help from the local people. And by virtue of the fact that, when you tell where that I need such and such a herb for such and such a illness, basically you're also telling your formula of healing. You're telling him your formula of healing, right? And then if you have an opinion which the Ved gives you, that instead of this herb, maybe if you try this is going to work better, that there you have an exchange right there. You have an exchange right there, because the Unani guys do not know the region, they don't know the availability, so they are seeking help, and thus there is an exchange that happens almost immediately. Then the other thing is that how this healing really happens, how this the system of healing works. In the Unani system, it is known as a system where you have various ways which are not intrusive, in the sense that they are not surgical ways, and you may sometimes not even have therapeutic ways, but you have ways which have to do with external exertion of pressure. Say for example, like there is a thing which is known as cupping. Cupping मतलब उसको हिजामा कहते हैं. तो cupping का मतलब ये होता है कि जैसे acupressure होता है, तो आपने you actually would put really a cup and you create a vacuum there, so that you pull out all the air and you create a vacuum. So this was known as the hijama. This was one thing. Then you have another thing which was which was called the tariq, which was sweating. So you would make people actually sweat to kind of clean their system. So you would expect that a lot of toxic things would go out through the sweat. That was one thing that happened. Then you had hammam. Hammam is bath, you know that. And in the the Turkish hammams are famous, you see. And the hammams, when you think of the hammams, they're nothing like the hammams and the baths that we can think of in today's day and time, because the hammams were they were luxurious areas. So you would have actually a pre-hammam waiting room. In fact, even when we talk about medieval India, there is a madarsa which is known as the madarsa of Sheikh Chilli. Sheikh Chilli, आपने generally उनका नाम सुना होगा in a more humorous sense, but Sheikh Chilli was actually a Sufi in Thanesar. And थानेसर का जो इलाका है वो चिश्ती सूफियों के साथ में जुड़ा हुआ है. तो वहां की जो रेमिनेसेस हम लोगों को मिली हैं, जो कि शाहजहां के पीरियड का बना हुआ है in the mid 17th century, you find कि उनका जो हम्माम है उनके मदरसे के स्टूडेंट्स के लिए, it has a waiting area. And let me also tell you कि उनके मदरसे में, शेख चिल्ली के मदरसे में, थानेसर में, Muslims and non-Muslims, all of them used to study, because it was a madrasa which was looking into a number of subjects. It doesn't have to do only with Quranic teaching. So there would be arithmetic and geometry and trigonometry and anything else that you can think of. तो हमाम जो है, हम हमाम की बात कर रहे हैं, तो हमाम में जो है वेटिंग एरिया. अब आपका जब नहाने का टर्न आएगा, because hammam will not be, like not so many hammams will be actually there. So you hang around there. Then, after you have the bath, then for the more rich people who could actually afford it, there was also the availability of what we now call in the modern terms the aroma therapy. तो पानी जो है वो pre-scented आता था हमाम में. So that is also therapeutic. And then you would decide कि अगर मान लीजिए आपका एक particular kind of ailment है, तो कौन सा आप उसमें fragrance डालेंगे to calm and soothe your patient internally and externally and all of that. And then you would also have a itar khana, where you'll be finally there'll be fragrances which will be applied and you will be dressed up and so on. So hammam was not like this, that you are rushing out for work and this is a quick 1 minute affair. It was an elaborate thing. But in the Unani system of medicine, it is a system of treatment. Now, speaking of this, there is a particular medical condition which is known as plantar fascia. I don't know whether you're aware of that or no, but plantar fascia is heel pain, and it's terrible kind of a heel pain which has no medicine at all. It doesn't have any medicine to cure it. The only cure that doctors might suggest is that you put hot water and cold water. So you alternate hot and cold water quickly. That's the only way that you can hope that this thing will get better at some point in time. Or maybe they would say that, you put an empty bottle in the arch of your foot and you keep, rotating that bottle with your foot. Now, when you think of the Unani system, you think of the hammam, because they used to know कि इसमें किसमें ठंडा पानी इस्तेमाल होगा, कहाँ गर्म पानी इस्तेमाल होगा, किसमें कितनी देर में आप पानी में बैठे रहेंगे, उस पानी में क्या मिला हुआ होगा, all of that. And then the other thing, it has to do with massage, because this the Unani system also had a lot to do with massage. Then there was another thing which was a part of the healing system, which is तय मतलब उल्टी करवाना किसी को, vomiting, inducing vomiting. That is also a part of this system. Then there was riyazat, which is exercise. Now riyazat, when you think of riyazat, it is pretty much like the yoga. तो जैसे योग है जो कि आयुर्वेद का एक उनका पैरेलल पार्ट चल रहा है, जिसके अंदर you kind of exercise your body and there are various postures which have various effects on the body. So the riyazat in the Unani system is also like exercise. Then there is another thing which was very interesting, which was leaching and also draining of blood, purging. So they would, if there was something, say for example, अगर किसी को कोई फोड़ा हुआ है, कोई बहुत बड़ी फुंसी हुई है, तो उसको काट देते थे और काट के उसमें कट लगा देते थे, कट लगा के उसका खून बहा देते थे। या जो लीचेस होती है, एक्चुअली में जो लीच होती है वो चिपका देते थे, ताकि वो लीच जहाँ पे इन्फेक्टेड एरिया वहां पे लीच चिपका देते थे, ताकि वो लीच सारा इन्फेक्टेड जो एरिया है उसका इन्फेक्शन, खून, पस जो है वो पी जाए। So these were all various methods. Now, these methods had to be combined with the local Hindustani methods to finally have a result. I will give you one quick idea that in the, and how important it was to know the local medication system and the local trees and herbs. In the 17th century, we all know about Aurangzeb. Yeah, it's a infamous ruler. So you find that when he displaced his father from the throne, also killed his two of his brothers, and the third brother was in Bengal. So he sent somebody to chase his brother, and he sent his own son, Prince Muhammad, and there was one of his very, very favorite ministers, Mir Jumla. And Mir Jumla was a diamond trader from Golconda in Deccan in South India, and who was a very trusted man of Aurangzeb. तो उन्होंने मीर जुमला को भेज दिया बंगाल में इसका पीछा करने के लिए अपने भाई का। एंड देन इट सो हैपेंड कि बंगाल में औरंगजेब के भाई का क्या हुआ ये तो पता ही नहीं है हम लोगों को, बिकॉज वो मर गया या उसको किसी और बादशाह ने मार लिया, उसकी डेड बॉडी नहीं मिली, कभी भी नहीं मिली। औरंगजेब के पूरे जिंदगी में औरंगजेब को हमेशा ये डर लगा रहता था कि कहीं ऐसा ना हो कि शाह शुजा जिंदा और वापस आ जाए, and there will be a rival claimant to the throne, because his dead body was never found. However, once the challenge of handling Shah Shuja was over, then you find that Mir Jumla went into Assam. अब जब वो असम में घुसते हैं तो उनका एक कमांडर है जिसका नाम है अहमद तालेश. He is writing a book which is known as the Fateh Kibriya. ठीक है. Now and it's also known as the Kibriya Nama. So it has to do with, he says that I am writing this book ताकि इससे जो पढ़ने वाला हो वो इबरत हासिल करे. For ibrat is a lesson. And he says that the belief is that anyone from North India, that is the North Indian plains, who enters into the region of Assam will not come out alive. Why? Because he says कि यहाँ पे जितने mosquitoes से born diseases हैं, ये 17th century में लिख रहा है, उसका इलाज जो North Indian plains वाले हैं उनको नहीं आता है. They don't know how to handle that. And he says that the skin diseases which are prevalent in Bengal and the region of Assam are not there in the North Indian plains. So if you are from here, and you will not know how to treat them unless you you seek cooperation from the local healers, and they may or may not cooperate, because they always looked at the conquerors who were coming to the region of Assam as intruders. So it was not easy to gain acceptance there. He says that, you will not find healers, you will not get cooperation from the local healers. So the chances were that even though you may actually conquer Assam, you're not going to survive. And most of your army is going to die. So the exchange of learning and the exchange of and the cooperation that was required from the practitioners of one healing system towards the practitioners of the other system, it was very, very important. When you think of the ruling classes, because they had the money, so they always employed both the Veds and the Hakims, because they would take a opinion from both of them, from the Hakims and the Veds. And when you think of the later period, when, say for example, in the reign of Shah Jahan's favorite daughter Jahanara Begum had got burnt, जल गई थी वो, because उनकी कॉटन की ड्रेस थी जिसमें आग लग गई थी, और वो शाहजहां की सुपर फेवरेट बेटी थी, और वही अपनी माँ मुमताज महल, जिनकी याद में ताजमहल बना हुआ है, उनके मरने के बाद जितना भी हरम का काम था, she used to look after, she was a leader of the हरम. तो उनके जितने भी भाई थे, दारा शुको, औरंगजेब, मुराद, शुजा, सबकी शादियों की तैयारी, सबके जहेज की तैयारी, सबकी बीवियों के जेवरों की तैयारी, everything Jahanara Begum used to do, and Jahanara Begum got burnt, and Shah Jahan was absolutely distraught. And we get information from various sources कि एक तो ये था कि उनकी तकिया के नीचे रोज पैसे रखे जाते थे जो कि अगले दिन सुबह फकीरों को दे दिए जाते थे। तो बहुत कीमती मोती और अलग अलग तरह की चीजें रखी जाती थी और सुबह दे दी जाती थी। दैट इज वन थिंग। देन वी ऑल्सो गेट टू नो कि हकीम भी लगे हुए थे, वैद भी लगे हुए थे, और वेस्टर्न प्रैक्टिशनर्स भी लगे हुए थे। बिकॉज बाय द टाइम यू रीच शाहजहां, there is already an advent of the Europeans, because काफी सारे यूरोपियन तब तक यहाँ पे आ ही चुके थे। तो यूरोपियन डॉक्टर्स भी उनका इलाज कर रहे थे और सब लोग मिलजुल के उनको ठीक करने की कोशिश कर रहे थे। और फाइनली जब वो ठीक हो पाई, एंड व्हेन शी हैड हर फर्स्ट रिचुअल बाथ आफ्टर बिकमिंग बेटर, तो उनको तौलवाया गया था। फिर उनका तुला दान हुआ था, तो उनको तौलवाया था, और जो रिचेस थी that was given to perhaps a European practitioner who was most active in healing her. So for the rich, they would always bring various people together and seek their opinion. But I'll just give you one quick example कि कैसे इसके अंदर intermingling है। कि अकबर को के बारे में we all know that Akbar was much into taking all kinds of people together and learning from everywhere, collecting learning from everywhere that he could collect learning. तो अकबर के पीरियड में क्या हुआ कि अकबर की जब खुद की तबीयत खराब हुई, तो there was always this rumor, जो कि हम लोगों को अकबर के पीरियड की ही जो किताब है, जैसे कि मुंतखब उत-तवारीख अब्दुल कादिर बदायूनी की लिखी हुई है, अकबर का कॉन्टेम्पररी था, वो लिखता है कि परहैप्स अकबर बिलीव्ड, एंड बदायूनी ये लिखता है कि एक बार अकबर की तबीयत बहुत खराब थी और वो सोते में बड़बड़ा रहे थे कि शेखू बाबा, शेखू सलीम को कहते थे, विच इज जहांगीर, हिज सन एंड सक्सेसर। तो he says कि शेखू बाबा मुझे मतलब जहर देने की क्या जरूरत थी, वैसे भी सब कुछ तुम्हारा ही था। And this rumor that his son was poisoning him and slow poisoning him was a rampant bizarre rumor in those times. So you find that अकबर की जब बहुत तबीयत खराब हुई, and the doctor who was treating him, the main doctor, was actually a Unani tibbi doctor, and he was a Irani. और ईरान के जो मेडिकल स्कूल्स थे वो बड़े फेमस माने जाते थे, तो बड़े वहां के डॉक्टर्स वर वेरी हाईली पेड। अब ये जो हकीम हुमाम थे, अब इनसे अकबर की तबीयत ना ठीक है। सो द नैरेटिव गोज लाइक दिस दैट अकबर बिकेम सो एंग्री दैट उसने अपनी छड़ी से हकीम साहब की पिटाई करी, एंड ही सेड कि ये जो है ईरान में ये तेल बेचता होगा। दिस इज ऑन रिकॉर्ड। He said कि ये ईरान में तेल बेचता होगा। इतना झूठा है कि इसने कहा कि I am a doctor and I have been feeding this man for years altogether, thinking कि जब तबीयत खराब होगी तो ये काम आएगा, तो इसको तो कुछ आता ही नहीं है। And then, I mean, जब अकबर ने उनको इतना डांटा, तो उन्होंने अकबर की दवा की जो डोज थी वो बहुत स्ट्रॉन्ग कर दी। एंड वो जो कंटेम्प्रेरी नैरेटिव्स हैं, उनका कहना ये है कि वो इतनी स्ट्रॉन्ग फिर डोज हो गई that he was not able to withstand it, and he was actually, his end came even earlier than it might have come otherwise. But what I wanted to say, अब इसके अंदर एक और बहुत इंटरेस्टिंग बात है। जब हम लोग ये कह रहे थे अभी थोड़ी देर पहले कि भाई you as a practitioner, you should also know a bit about who your patient is, and what are the other factors that you can look into and help in the healing process. तो इसमें एक बड़ा इंटरेस्टिंग पहलू ये भी है कि जहांगीर के पीरियड में, while you would have that the local the Irani hakims are the people who are the main doctors. They're very important, because Noor Jahan Begum was from Iran, and there was a lot of patronage to the Iranis, and like I said to you, that some of the medical schools in Iran were supposed to be really famous. So we find that जहांगीर का जो पोता था, which is शाह शुजा, जिसके बारे में अभी हम लोग बात कर रहे थे, जो कि औरंगजेब का भाई है। तो शाह शुजा औरंगजेब से जस्ट बड़ा भाई था। तो वो जब बहुत छोटा था तो वो छत से गिर गया खेलते हुए, और वो अपने दादा दादी के पास था। तो वो बहुत फेवरेट था नूरजहां बेगम का और जहांगीर का, और 2 साल का 2.5 साल का था, वो गिर गया नीचे एंड ही फेंटेड. एंड आई मीन जहांगीर राइट्स इन हिज ऑटोबायोग्राफी कि जब उसको होश नहीं आ रहा था तो मुझे ऐसे लग रहा था कि कि वो बेहोश नहीं है बल्कि मैं बेहोश हूँ, एंड दैट एज इफ मैं मर जाऊंगा. दैट इज व्हाट ही राइट्स. And then what he does is that he calls a astrologer. So there is an astrologer whose name is Jyotik Ray. Jyotik Ray was a Hindu Brahmin. And उसका बार बार जहांगीर जिक्र करता है, उसने उसको बुलवाया. And Jyotik Ray said that you don't have to worry. And this happened twice in case of Shah Shuja. जब शाह शुजा की तबीयत हुई खराब और ज्योतिक रे ने जहांगीर को कहा कि ये मरेगा नहीं, आपका ये पोता जो है ये मरेगा नहीं, इसलिए क्योंकि आपकी अपनी जो कुंडली है उसमें कोई दुख नहीं है. तो उस बच्चे के साथ में क्या होगा वो तो डॉक्टर्स देख रहे हैं, बट यू हैव अनदर ब्राह्मण पंडित हु इज टेलिंग जहांगीर कि इस बच्चे को कुछ नहीं होगा बिकॉज वी हैव सम नॉन हिंदी उर्दू स्पीकर्स. व्हाट डज दैट मीन?
Ma'am, it would be better if you stick to English because we have international students who don't understand Hindi or Urdu.
Oh, okay. All right. Fine. All right.
Sorry.
Yeah. Oh, all right. Yeah, no issues. So, you find that there is a Brahmin astrologer, astronomer who's called in. And then that fellow says that nothing's going to happen to your grandson because your own horoscope says that there is no sorrow which is lined up for you. So there you find that there is a mixture not just of the medicine, of the medical practice, but also there is a mixture of some other practice altogether which is coming into this. So there is in fact a complete mixture. The other thing that we find is that there is the translation of books from Persian into Sanskrit and from Sanskrit into Persian, and there are a number of books which are being written in the period of the Delhi Sultanate, which is the 14th, 15th century, in which provide equivalents of the herbs which are being used in Persian in the Unani system of medicine, and what are the local Sanskrit or the local lingual Hindustani equivalent for those herbs. So that means that the people of both the Unani and the Vedic system are actually referring to each other and trying to understand how they would heal a particular patient. The armies, when they moved, they would always have doctors with themselves. And for the armies, it was very important, that people in the armies always had a sense of cohesion because their sufferings were shared, their victories were shared, their losses were shared. So, you will find that the healers got an opportunity to learn about the various healing systems from each other. Then, of course, if you think of meditation, the best and the most touching example that I find is the one which comes from the Tuzuke Jahangiri of Jahangir, because Jahangir was very fond of a yogi. So he was very fond of a yogi, and that yogi used to first reside in Gujarat, and then he came and he became a resident of the region of Mathura. And Jahangir, the emperor, used to love to go to meet him and to talk to him. And his name was Jadrup Gosai. So Jadrup Gosai was such a favorite of the emperor that he would make it a point to go and see him. And Jadrup would not come to the court to meet the emperor. The emperor would go to meet Jadrup. And Jadrup lived in a very tiny cave. It was, like Jahangir writes that the cave was so tiny that I could hardly fit into it. It was difficult for me to get into that gate. And so there is an exchange of, mystic ideas on spiritualism, ideas on, metaphysics, understanding life and death, and so on and so forth. And Jahangir as a ruler, let me tell you, although he himself was quite well read, also an author, like he was very fond of fashionable clothes, jewelry, and so on and so forth. But at the same time, he was very interested in, spiritualism also. And when he is describing his meeting with Jadroob Gosai, the example that he takes to compare Jadroob Gosai with is that of Hakim Luqman. Now, Hakim Luqman in the classic Islamic system of medicine was a very famous Hakim. And it was believed that Hakim Luqman would have a cure for almost anything. And the Hakim could have charged any amount of money for healing people, but he didn't do that, because he, like what Charak says, because it is the Charak Samhita which says that your doctor doesn't have to be greedy. Because if you are a doctor and if you are greedy, then you will not be able to heal the way you would heal if you are also a spiritualist. And Hakim Luqman would fall typically into the kind of category that Charak Samhita of ancient India is talking about. And Jahangir, when talking about Jadroob Gosai, cites Hakim Luqman, and he says that once somebody asked Hakim Luqman that you can make a lot of money, but you don't, and your house is so tiny and you hardly have any possessions, do you think it is enough for you? So he said, Hakim Luqman said that what I have is in fact enough for anyone who is only a traveler. He said that what I have is enough for anyone who's only a traveler, implying that we are not going to be permanently residing on this earth. We're just passing by. So this is just about enough that I have. So you find, that as far as spiritual understanding is concerned, there's again a lot which is being exchanged. I mean, if you think of the idea of the Gulistan and the Bustan of Sheikh Sadi, every Indian Shurfa, every elite of Hindustan in the medieval period would invariably have a copy of these texts with them. That was something which was a part of personal libraries. And this wisdom has to do with, basically the Iranian setup. It has a cultural backdrop to it. But its acceptance and its popularity in Hindustan is absolutely massive. So when you think of these things, you find that there is completely an intermixture of the, not just the system of medicine, which has to do with physical healing, but also meditative systems, also systems where you would find, that you can have ideas of humanism which are being exchanged. Like if you think of what is known as the Nama-e Khirat Afza, which is a book which is a Persian translation of a Sanskrit book which is known as the Singhasan Battisi. So Singhasan Battisi was translated into Persian by Abdul Qadir Badayuni, who was a contemporary of Akbar, and it was named the Nama-e Khirat Afza. The Nama-e Khirat Afza means the book of intelligence or the book of knowledge. And the stories which are there in the Nama-e Khirat Afza, some of them belong to very, very ancient set of stories coming from the Panchtantras, coming from, the Vital Pachisi, and all those different kind of stories which are all put together. So there is this exchange, and the exchange is aiming at making your own life easier, simpler, more peaceful, and making it easy for others as well. So you find, that whether it is making, whether we are talking about physical ease, or we are talking about mental peace, or whether we are talking about prosperity and being successful, all those ideas are being exchanged from one set of, learners and teachers to another set of learners and teachers. And the process is so obvious and it's so rampant that you just have to open your eyes to see it. So it's like that. So I think I'll stop here, Alia, and invite any questions if there are any questions or comments from the listeners. Thank you so much for your patience.
We should be one thanking you, ma'am, taking out time from your busy schedule.
No, absolute pleasure.
Yeah, so anybody who has questions may raise their hands now, and ma'am will answer them for you. Rajan, you can switch on your camera, and ask your question.
Yeah, am I audible, ma'am?
Yes, you are.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really enjoyed your lecture. I collected lots of new facts
Thank
about
you.
the Mughal period. However, ma'am, I have a certain pain in my heart which I would like to express. You know, we have to believe in the fact that Indian civilization is the most ancient one, and you know, it was also the most prolific in terms of herbs or geography or in whatever sense I want to say. And then certain invaders come from a desert where there was no water, and how can we expect the herbs there? Then you are talking about the exchange of knowledge. So I am, you know, assuming those invaders who came here firstly convert the faith of the people, and then somehow snatch their knowledge and, you know, accepted that it was their knowledge. By changing the terminology, do you think that we can say that that knowledge is basically theirs and not collected from here? So this is the thing I wanted to say, that it was basically the Indian knowledge converted by the certain invaders who had nothing to contributed. Perhaps we have lots of resources. We say that those invaders didn't have anything scientific in their field. I do not have the resources and references. Sorry for that, but this is the thing I wanted to say. That idealization of
No. See, firstly, do you know about the history of the other places from where the invaders are coming?
no, ma'am, I don't know. But at least I can say that they are coming from Middle East or somewhere desert. We cannot expect such kind of thing which we expect here.
Well, see, Mesopotamia is not a region where you have deserts.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you for that.
No. Let me just finish. When you talk about Muslims, I think you have a preconceived notion that all Muslims are from Arabia.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the conquerors in Hindustan, because you said that they are coming from a desert, the conquerors who came to Hindustan are not Arabs. They're not coming from Arabia. They are Turks. So they are not Arabs. That is the first thing. The other thing is that the Muslim Turkish invaders are not the first invaders who invaded Hindustan, because India was always being invaded by various others like the Kushans and the Huns. They were also invaders, right? So there is always invasion which was happening from the northwest frontier of Hindustan. And it was an ancient phenomena in itself, because you would find that the people who were living in the North Indian plains were actually pushed down to the southern Indian peninsula. So it's a matter of, kind of political aggression, and political aggression was a way of life. So that is how it was. And you cannot compare the past systems of politics with the present system of politics, because politics and human understanding has developed a lot and changed a lot over a period of time. And so, because since you do not know whether they had any literature or any language or any culture or system of medicine and healing, so unless you first check that out, you cannot say that they didn't have, because you don't know.
The name which you basically highlighted, Aurangzeb, Akbar, at least I can assume where they basically
I said
belong
that
to.
the Unani system comes from
Yeah,
Greece.
but I didn't heard a lot about them. I heard most of the Mughal emperors, their stories, their idealization. I didn't heard much more from Unani's people. I didn't heard much more about the ancient Indian Ayurvedic system, which is perhaps the most ancient one. And second thing I want to say, you know, in the recent time when we becoming quite liberal, do not share the patent of a vaccine. How can we expect at the time when people were not much more open-hearted, and new people would come, they would share something without force, their knowledge or their, you know, wisdom of medicine or whatever. So this is also a fact.
No. Human beings are much more open to sharing than you are imagining. Human nature is pre-programmed for sharing, for acceptance, for cooperation. In fact, this whole idea of the boundaries that you are talking about are boundaries which are modern boundaries. The world was an open space. There was no country.
It is open. It is not open for the invaders. It is open for the good people, not for the people who would come and force you to share something. I think this is a fact. This is a fact we have to accept in one way or another. Thank you.
no, my friend, your whole understanding of history is absolutely, I should say, distorted.
Yes.
Because you are considering that you are imagining that the countries were countries when of the time that we are talking about. The boundaries of the countries used to change overnight with war and peace. The country that you are seeing is a country which was, the boundaries are decided in the modern Indian times, right? So when you're thinking of the past, you have to be much more careful because there are some preconceived notions that you have. And as far as the programming of the human soul is concerned, the human soul is programmed for humanism. The human soul is not programmed for anything else except humanism. And this is, I think, it's very nice that you've joined this dialogue program, because I think you really needed this dialogue program to understand what dialogue and understanding and cooperation is about. I think you really needed it.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome. But you need to open up your mental space, my friend. I think that your mental space is very constrained.
No, thank you so much, ma'am. But I just propose such certain assumption proposition, which I have a reason to, supported. My first proposition was that no one would share their resources for the invaders because
Why will they not share? Why will they not share?
How can suppose if an invader come and force me to share something? How would I share?
How are you? You were there? Were you there?
What, man?
No. Were you there? Were you there?
Suppose if Russia goes there in the Ukraine and asks them to share their resources, they will not share. No one
don't
share.
suppose. No, don't suppose anything. You are mixing. No, you are mixing timelines. You are bringing in.
Ma'am, I'm simply saying that we share things with the good people, not to the bad people. Simple.
Who are you to define who is good and bad?
I'm giving the reason. Invaders have never been a good people.
No.
How can you support the invaders to be good people?
No. How do you define good and bad people?
Because I'm a scholar of moral philosophy. I know what is good and what is bad. I have a reason for that. The people who force someone, the simple.
So you are no. So how can you club people as these are the invaders and these are the others? Invasion was a way of life.
Did you
find in what sense are you saying that? Invasion was a way of life in history.
Now you are supporting. Thank you so much.
People were, you are saying that today vegetarianism is a thing. There was a time when people used to hunt and eat. There was a time when people used to hunt and eat. What do you have to say about that? In the pre-Neolithic period, in the prehistoric period.
I am saying that if it comes to the relativism, then everything is justified. Torturing a small child is also justified. Invasion would also be justified. There is no parameter when it comes to relativism.
No. And the other interesting. The other thing is this, that if you are not talking about invasions, do you think in a society where there is no invasion, is there justice? Supposing we do not have an invasion, but do you think that the society which is not being invaded has a just society? There is discrimination against women. There is discrimination against poor. There is age-based discrimination. What about that? Supposing there is no.
I am not understanding your philosophy of goodness. I am simply saying
in the philosophy of goodness.
Our resources and goodness.
No.
Other scholars are also waiting in the room. They may also ask a question. Thank you so much, ma'am. I really enjoyed it.
I think your question is very relevant. In a household, say supposing you are not an invader, right? But you beat up your wife. Is that justice? You are not an invader, but you beat up your child. Is that justice? You are not an invader, but you are a part of an economic system which is exploitative. Is that justice? It's more complex. So simplified it. So you need to please read a lot more before you reach any kind of conclusions and assumptions. Because if you assume anything and you are completely, I should say, mixing up timelines, you need to read much more. You need really, you need, I think you are in the right place. Good that you are doing this dialogue course. You really needed it.
Perhaps, ma'am, we also need to learn that what is moral philosophy and what is its history. I have thoroughly read the history of moral philosophy. I have worked in what is good and what is bad. So at least I can say something on morality.
That's
so
why I'm asking you. That's why I'm asking you.
What?
Yeah, that's why I'm asking you that according to moral philosophy, in a society where there is no invasion, is it a just society? Aapka the good or bad ka definition, you said na, the good or bad definition is this, that the invaders are bad and the other people are good. So in the among good people, you think that there was no gender discrimination ever? Was there no gender discrimination ever amongst the good people?
Who is justifying that? Who is justifying basically gender discrimination?
Then how are you defining? Yeah, that's what I'm asking. Then how are you defining good and bad? How are you? What is your definition of good and bad? Who are the good people?
You are idealizing in the modern scenario that they had so much wisdom. They, took so much wisdom from there, and this is why I am saying that by forcing someone and snatching someone's wisdom and saying that is an exchange, that is problematic.
No, there was an exchange.
In the chat room, kindly take their question as well.
There was an exchange. No, there was an exchange and there's an exchange now. So it's the people who think that there cannot be an exchange and who compartmentalize people into good and bad, we have a problem there. Okay, fine. Yeah.
I think it's best to base your questions on some amount of research. Like you said, you have no sources for your questions, Rajan.
This was good because this was good because we get to know, what is the kind of line that people can think of. I mean, you cannot compartmentalize people into good and bad at all. And I think even individually or as groups, because all of us have shades of gray, and that's the beginning and the end of it. And with our shades of gray and with our faults and our shortcomings, we are supposed to help each other. We are supposed to cooperate with each other. We are supposed to search for the good in each other, because nobody is completely white and no one's completely black. We all have shades of gray. I would not say that, anyone's perfect. No group is perfect. No community, nobody's perfect. Everyone has got their set of flaws. And this is what the beauty of dialogue is, that despite our flaws, and despite, the resentment that we may have, we still have to live together for the sake of humanism and for the sake of peace. And we have to spread ideas which talk of peace, which can bring happiness, which can actually bring a smile on the face of a poor child. That's what we have to do. And no one has a claim to being good. And no one can, say that so-and-so is good or bad. We are all gray. That's it.
Rajan, you gave up your right to ask more questions. Ravi Dubey, you are next.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for the session, and it's really too good to hear from you, sir. Ma'am, my question will be that about the medicine diplomacy, which has been currently in work. Right now.
Just one second, please.
Yes,
Welcome back, ma'am. Yeah, okay. So we can take Ravi Dubey's question now.
Yes, Ravi.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am, for being back.
No, I would have come back. I wouldn't have run away anywhere.
And my question was about the diplomacy which is going around the vaccine, as we have seen the COVID-19 and how it has devastated the whole, each and every country, about each and every region. So right now it has been seen and it has been in the report that Westerns have already pre-booked their vaccines for the whole populations, and how they are doing with it. And at the second, whereas in the second part, the China and Russia have been trying their best to support other countries such as in African countries. So how do we see about the whole scenario of this medicine in coming future? If that in coming future there goes another kind of any virus or any kind of this type of catastrophe, so how are we going to manage it?
You see, yeah. You know what, Ravi? I mean, the question of the medicinal diplomacy is something which is more recent, right? and which is so much in the news. हाँ बोलिए. हाँ ठीक है, fine, okay. So you know what you are talking. The bigger question, in fact, the larger picture is this: that this has to do with the divide and the backwardness of the third world countries. Basically, the third world countries and the countries which had been colonized. It is those countries where you find, that we are at the receiving end, even in the pandemic, because, the vaccines are going to be, most of them, they are going to manage all the medical situation from there, and most of the scientific development is happening from that, and a whole lot of it. So this doesn't work in our favor at all. I mean, because we are already at a disadvantage because of having been a colony. हम लोगों ने, मतलब हम जिस disadvantage में फंस गए हैं because of being a colony of the British rulers, उससे बाहर जो निकलने में हमें जितना समय लग रहा है और जितना समय हमें लगेगा, this is only a small part of that whole loss that we have incurred. It's a huge loss of becoming a colony, by becoming a colony, because we've received a setback in terms of the education system. We've received a setback in the scientific development. We've also received a setback in understanding each other. There is a setback there also, because there is a lot of misunderstanding and misgiving, which is a part of the legacy of the colonists. They always used to do this wherever they went. So they would not only rob people of money and the possibility of growth and letting people think in a positive way, they left behind what is known as, quote unquote, imagined history. There is a concept of imagined history. So you imagine something, you write it down, you profess it, you make people believe it. This is a part of how the way the colonizers work, and they work like this they have the same formula. They work like that in every colony that they made. So, this, whatever happened to us in the COVID situation is only a quick manifestation, a very obvious manifestation of all the sufferings that we anyways have, because of being suffered as a colony. It's a part of that. So they will always have an upper hand.
Yes, ma'am.
आपने mass resignation के बारे में सुना? Mass resignation. Have you heard of this?
No, ma'am.
You know what happened in the US in the COVID-19? They said कि हम सबकी नौकरियां जो हैं वो चली गई, बहुत लोगों की नौकरियां चली गई, and the government said कि we are going to give them a stipend ताकि वो जो हैं वो अपना जीवन व्यतीत कर पाए. A lot of people thought कि ये stipend ही इतना अच्छा है कि हमें काम करने की जरूरत ही क्या है, हम थोड़ा सा और अपना जीवन जरा सा और नीचे ले आएंगे और हमें काम करने की जरूरत नहीं है, हमें सरकारी स्टाइपेंड मिल रहा है, हमारे लिए वही काफी. There have been mass resignations in US. People don't want to work because सरकार से जो उनको स्टाइपेंड मिल रहा है. हमारे यहाँ नौकरी के लिए पब्लिक परेशान घूम रही है, ठीक है, और ये इंडिया की बात नहीं है. This is about the colonies. This is an impact of colonization and years of being exploited, and जिसको हम लोग कहते हैं ना, milking somebody dry. It's something like that. And there has been a huge intellectual drain. Because हम लोग तो इसको देखते हैं ना, हम तो बहुत पास से इस इंडस्ट्री में काम, we look at it very closely because we work in this industry of education. So, say for example, when we talk about the idea of philosophy, you know that MPhil and PhD, you must have heard these two words, no? MPhil and PhD. Both these words have to do with philosophy. This is what the first one is, Master of Philosophy, and other one is the Doctorate of Philosophy in English, or Doctorate of PhD in History, PhD in English, PhD in whatever, right? So the PhD means Doctor of Philosophy in History, right? Now, when you get into philosophy in history means that you will not study history as a dry subject of dates and war and peace. You have to philosophize it. You have to put it in context, many other contexts, in context of humanism, in context of, international development, in numerous contexts of cultural, social exchange, linking the threads of various histories. That's what Doctor of Philosophy in History is. So you just can't say ki, you know, in 1526 you had Panipat battle, in 1556 you have the second battle of Panipat. That's not history. You have to philosophize. What led to that? What was the aftermath? So you know, basically when you talk about the diplomacy in the medical sector as of now, it will have its own equations in accordance with the lowered condition of the colonies in any case. We are still reeling under that loss. It's a huge loss.
Yes, ma'am, it has been.
Yeah.
But ma'am, we can also say that our government support system in this whole pandemic has been really, somehow it has been marginalized as how it should be managed. Because we have seen that at some places government has really failed and they need to work upon that, on those things.
I would say that, you know, the government has been trying very hard. The government is, you know, it's all in for the welfare of the people. The government is working for the welfare of the country and its citizens. And they have tried to really handle the situation in the best way possible. But the government has its own limitations, because you see, we have policies which have been in place for many, many years. So one cannot expect any kind of a magic to happen suddenly. It's going to take time, and it has a number of logistics. And our massive population is one of the factors why a lot of schemes don't work. And for that also, you cannot blame the Indians, because Indians are predisposed to have more children than people in other places. They are biologically predisposed to have more children than people in other places. The climate in India is so beautiful and amazing. It conduces more of growth of life. So, you know, you can't blame anyone really for the kind of population that we have. As far as the role of the government of India in the pandemic is concerned, and also in the education sector, they are really trying to improve things. They are actually working quite hard to improve things. If you think of the, you know, the new education policy that they are thinking of, I think we are looking forward to have good reforms in the future.
Thank you, ma'am.
You're welcome, Ravi.
Arokya, are you still here? Yes. Yeah. Ask your question.
Ma'am, I really appreciate your vast knowledge. It's quite interesting, and you have got so many details of the history. I really appreciate. And my question is on the relation that you talked about, Unani and Vedic. For me, it seems like the Unani medicine is sidelined from the beginning. In the history, we learned that Vedic rituals and the Vedic way of looking at things was very much dominant. Am I audible, ma'am?
Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, in the history, we learned that Vedic way of looking at things was very much dominant. For me, it seemed like Unani is sidelined. Even today, when we take up these English medicines and Unanis, so for me, there is a kind of domination over Unanic way of looking at things. So for me, there is a kind of politics which is involved in what you are talking about. And as we live in this COVID-19 situation and pandemic conditions, there was nothing said about this Unani's way of healing people. So I would like to get your opinion.
Well, if you say, George, that there is a politics in, you know, in kind of promoting a particular maybe a stream of medicine, or maybe any other, maybe even philosophy, even books. You're right, because, you know, politics does have an intrusion in many matters, and more so because there is an economic side to everything, whatever we are talking about. The other thing which happened to Unani was that the patrons of Unani, somehow a whole lot of them would collapse with the collapse of the Mughal Empire. And when you have the colonists who are going to come here, the colonizers will patronize the English system of medicine. So the English system of medicine will overtake everything. It will overtake both the Unani and the Ayurveda, actually. And you would find, that it is the English medicine which becomes all in all, and it is looked upon as something which is, modernized and much more safe. I'll give you one quick example. If you might have heard about Dr. Mukhtar Ahmad Ansari. Mukhtar Ahmad Ansari was one of the founding members of my university, Jamia Millia, and he was also a very close associate of Mahatma Gandhi, and he was in fact the first person to have, expressed support and stood in support of the non-cooperation movement with Mahatma Gandhi was professing. So Dr. Mukhtar Ahmad Ansari was, he was an allopathic doctor. And in Delhi, in the 1930s, there were only 2 doctors who had motor cars. The car that we talk about, the vehicle. So there were only 2 people who had a vehicle, and Mukhtar Ahmad was one of them. And Mukhtar Ahmad had done his allopathic medicine from London. He was a doctor who had studied in London. And then he came back to India to serve the people, and he had a clinic in Old Delhi and all of that. So you can imagine that the kind of money that he had. Then on the other hand, you also have, Hakim Ajmal Khan, who was a very famous Hakim, almost a contemporary of Dr. Mukhtar Ahmad Ansari. But Hakim Ajmal Khan was perhaps not as rich as Mukhtar Ahmad was. And clearly, I think the British saw to it that they set aside every indigenous system, whether it was the indigenous books, the texts. You find that there is a revivalist movement both in Hinduism and Islam with the coming of the British, because they both of them kind of started looking into what are the things that they can improve on. So yeah, there is. You're right. I mean, allopathic medicine has overtaken everything. Even homeopathy it has overtaken. But the interesting part about homeopathy is that the Germans always have a different way of looking at things. Germans also have very innovative minds, because America में भी जितने weapon की जितनी भी industry है, अगर आप history पढ़ेंगे of the weaponry of guns and ships and all of that, you would find that a lot of innovation and invention was not actually coming from Americans, but it was coming from Germans who had migrated to America. So and the homeopathy comes from them. So homeopathy has its own totally different line of thinking, that they say that that you have to introduce a bit of the disease to kill the disease. So it is like that. So they have a totally different approach. But why allopathy became so important was because you have the discovery of things like X-ray. Say for an example, you have X-ray, you have anesthesia. So all of those things come from there. So they have a very good and very strong method of dealing with physical pain. So that becomes very important.
Thank you, ma'am.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Pragya Narang is next. You may ask your question.
Yeah, thank you, ma'am. So one of the things that came to my mind when I heard the story about, where this aide of Aurangzeb goes to Assam, and I'm just wondering about the languages, because how did, we know that there are borrowed words in general, because people were constantly traveling and they were having dialogues and exchanging. So, so one, I'm curious about, how that exchange, what made it easier, and how easy or difficult it was in process. And second, I also I'm curious, are there any borrowed words between Unani and the local practicing medicine of Veds, etc.? So are there any common words that we find? So that's
okay.
Just
okay. So first, for the first question, I think you brought up a really interesting question, because it also answers something that Rajan was earlier talking about. I was telling you about this book, Tarikh-e-Ibriya, and in this you have the Mughal army which comes into Assam as an quote-unquote invader. Okay. And they are very scared because they don't know the language and they're scared of the diseases here and so on. Now, what happens to the local people in Assam? The local people, amongst them also, you have the rich and the poor. There are some more smart guys and some of them are, they are not so wise, so to say. So what these guys told the poorer of the villagers, they said that the Mughal army is going to overrun everything. So the best is that you run away from here. You leave the village and you bury all your riches in your huts and you go. from here and hide in the jungles, because in the jungles you had the tribes there, and the tribes would give shelter to these people for money, and so, and this was a very difficult situation, that there were army of invaders which has come in. So these guys, these poor fellows, whatever they had, they buried in their huts and they went and hid in the jungles. Now, when the Mughal army came, they found that there was nobody there. The villages were absolutely deserted. And the local rich who had said this to the poorer fellows, that you bury everything, they dug up everything. And they took all the wealth of their own people even before the army arrived. Even before the invaders actually came, the local smart guys, they looted the villagers themselves. And when the Mughal army passed by from there and the villagers came back to their houses, they found that there was nothing there. So neither did the Mughals get anything, nor the poor were looted by them, but they were looted by the locals. So that is, that's a strange way how greed works. So, this is just one of the manifestations of how greed works. As far as the common words that you were talking about, there was, of course, a commonality and putting together of, of ideas of healing, of ideas of practicing how one could heal somebody. But maybe I can't think of this. It's not coming to my mind right now, but I'm sure that there would be a number of common words that we can talk about. There would be. There's no question that there wouldn't be. So I will message to Alia and she will send you, because there is going to be.
Thank you.
It sounds like Professor Nasreen has found the topic for her next series of research. Yeah, you're just as interested as Pragya is. Thank you so much, ma'am. I don't think we have any more questions. If anybody does, you may unmute yourself and ask your question. Yeah. Okay, Pushpika, go ahead.
I have a comment, not any question. So first of all, thank you so much, ma'am, for the wonderful session, for the wonderful teaching. And
thank you.
I think not me only, all of us got a lot of things to know from the past, and it's always so fascinating to learn about our past and how profound it was. It is now. And but the main take back I am taking from the session today is that it really struck me when you said human souls are meant to meant for sharing and humanity. I mean, this is such a basic thing, but I think I haven't read anywhere. So I'm really fascinated with this term, really liking it. And another most important thing, that's what you said, that we all are gray. I mean, I love that. So thank you so much for the session. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. To add to this, this concept it occurs there in a book which is known as the Kashful Mehjoob. Kashful Mehjoob was an 11th century mystical treatise which was written by a man called Ali Hujweri. And the Kashful Mehjoob is supposed to be the first book of Sufism which was written in Hindustan, because Ali Hujweri was writing in Hindustan. So he says that all souls were, they are in like a pool. And from that pool, they are thrown into the world. In the world, they may acquire different kind of bodies. They may acquire different kind of religions. They may acquire different kind of language, ethnicity, and so on. But they are from the same pool. And why one would believe that they are pre-programmed for goodness, the lie detector test works like this, that the lie detector test is this only, that the moment you will lie, your heartbeat is going to become faster, and your blood pressure is going to rise. That means your body is not programmed to lie, isn't it? So that's how this works. And we are all programmed to love. You have a fight with somebody, you will lose your sleep, isn't it? And love in itself is healing. I mean, love is the greatest healer, actually. That is why you would find that some patients recover much more faster than others. And that is something that Charak Samhita also says. Charak himself says that if you make the patient feel loved and wanted, the chances are that he's going to recover. So truly, and so nice that you caught on to these fine points, and you were, you are taking them back with you. That makes me so happy, and I feel that all the time that I spent with this class today has been a success. That maybe if there is nobody else, at least there is this one girl who's taking something really nice with her. Love you.
Pleasure, ma'am. Thank you.
So with this lovely comment and your answer on it, we will end the session here. And thank you once again, Professor Nasreen. And on behalf of the Secretary General as well, he is not able to join us today, but he's listening. And thank you for all the participants and your interactive participation, your questions and your comments. And I think we should have a vote, and we should have Professor Nasreen again with us soon. So, ma'am, you need to think accordingly and take out time for us. Thank you so much. And we will see you for the next session. Bye-bye.
Great pleasure. Bye. Thank you so much. Bye. Bye.
Bye-bye, ma'am.